This is Chronicles of Wild, where the silent heroes finally speak, through their actions. She wasn't supposed to be there, not in the river, not clinging to a tree branch, not with lungs full of water and eyes wide with fear. 12 years old, swept away in a flood no one saw coming. No life jacket, no flashlight, no one even knew she was gone. And yet, hours later, rescuers would find her, alive, and beside her, a dog no one remembered feeding. It began on what should have been a quiet afternoon. The sun was out, children played, families cooked over open fires. But far off in the mountains, a storm was building, angry and silent. By the time the first warning came, it was already too late. The river swelled, mud paths turned into rapids, and houses were swallowed whole in minutes. In the chaos, she did what only the brave do. She turned back. Her little brother had slipped. She reached for him, and the river reached for her. In one terrible moment, she was gone, swept downstream through mud, branches, and debris. Her small body fought to survive. She slammed into a tree trunk, gasped for breath, and clawed her way to a broken log jammed between rocks. That's where she stayed, for hours, shivering, soaked, and half-conscious. She screamed once, maybe twice. No one answered, and as darkness fell, so did her hope, until she heard it, a bark, not loud, not aggressive, just steady, like a signal. Then the sound of splashing, closer, urgent. Out of the shadows, through the churned water, came a shape. Not a person, not a rescuer. It was a dog, thin, ragged, covered in mud. One of the village strays no one ever named. He had no owner, no home. He wandered alone, often chased off by stones or shouts. But tonight he wasn't wandering. Tonight he had come for her. The dog swam to her side and whimpered. He paced in circles, barking toward the hills like he knew someone was out there. When she began to slip from the log, he grabbed her sleeve gently between his teeth. When she closed her eyes, he nudged her face to keep her awake. And when the sun finally rose, the dog didn't leave. And that was just the beginning. If you're already feeling something, if a part of you needs to know what happened next, take a moment now to subscribe. This isn't just a story about a flood. It's about the courage to stay when it's easier to run. The kind of loyalty we don't often see, not even from humans. So before we dive into the full story, tap like, hit subscribe, share this with someone who still believes in quiet heroes. Now let's continue. Instead, he climbed the riverbank and barked toward the forest trail, again and again, until a pair of rescue workers appeared. They followed the sound. They found her, and standing over her like a guardian carved from the earth was him. A dog no one fed. Plus, a dog no one claimed. A dog who refused to let a little girl die alone. They say not all heroes wear capes. But in this village they learned. Some wear fur, carry scars, and never ask for thanks. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not in that river. Not clinging to a dying tree. Not with fingers numb from cold and eyes too heavy to keep open. She was just 12. Too small to fight the current. Too young to be this alone. And yet, when the sun rose the next morning, she was still there. Alive, barely. And beside her stood a creature no one had noticed before. A dog, soaked, silent, and still. But to understand what brought her to that moment, we have to go back. It began like any other day. The village was small, tucked into the folds of a quiet valley where the mountains whispered old secrets. Children played barefoot in the dusty roads. Men carved wood under the shade. Women washed vegetables in the slow-moving stream that cut through the center of town. And she, Anya, was one of those children. Thin, curious, wild-haired, and always running just a bit too fast for her own good. Her laugh, bright and bird-like, echoed through the valley each morning as she raced her little brother, Ravi, past the old fig tree and down the stone steps toward the stream. They were inseparable. Ravi with his crooked smile and grubby hands always full of treasures. Shiny rocks, bug shells, a feather he swore belonged to a hawk. On this particular morning, Anya had taken his hand and whispered a secret. "Let's go to the big rock today." "The one across the river?" Ravi blinked. She nodded. "Only if we run." They ran. Of course they ran. Up in the hills, storm clouds gathered, but the valley remained in sunlight. No one thought to check the sky beyond the ridgeline. No one heard the distant thunder. Anya and Ravi were already ankle-deep in the river before anyone noticed the water rising. They didn't see the current shift. Didn't see the thin stream that had always been gentle grow impatient. But the river knew. The river was already hungry. Anya was halfway across when Ravi slipped. His foot caught between stones. He fell sideways with a splash, nothing dangerous at first. But when he tried to stand, the current had changed. It pulled him down the bank, toward a curve in the river known for hidden roots and sudden drop-offs. Anya screamed. She turned back instantly, pushing against the water, arms slicing the surface. She wasn't fast enough. She saw his head bob, then vanish. She dove without thinking. That was the last time anyone saw them, at least for a while. The village raised the alarm. Men sprinted downstream. Women called from the bridges. But the river had already taken them. Anya came up once for air, saw trees spinning, then darkness again. Water filled her ears. She grabbed at anything, roots, stones, Ravi. But he was gone. She didn't even know which way was up. Something crashed into her shoulder. A branch? A log? Her arm went numb. Her head spun. Her lungs burned. Then, silence. Not death. Stillness. She was wedged between two rocks, clinging to a twisted tree limb. Water rushed around her, but she was caught. Floating, half out of the flood. Her fingers dug into the bark. Her legs dangled in the current. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the trees above her, blinking as the sky darkened. Hours passed. Back in the village, search teams formed. Flashlights flickered through fog. Names were called into the night, but they were looking in the wrong place. No one knew Anya had been carried miles downriver. No one imagined she had survived the fall, the current, the rocks. And no one, not one person, knew who else had seen her go under. Because watching from a quiet distance was a dog. He had no name, just ribs, sharp under a matted coat, eyes the color of burnt honey, and a silence about him that made people uneasy. He was always there, in the alleyways, beneath carts, beside the bakery at dawn. He never barked, never begged. He simply watched. Some said he had been abandoned long ago. Others thought he was born in the wild. Children tried to pet him, but he vanished before their hands got close. He didn't belong. Not to anyone. Not to anywhere. Except now. Something had changed. That evening, as the wind shifted and rain began to spit, the dog had moved with purpose. He'd followed the scent of fear down a muddy path, across fields, along the swollen riverbank. He ran without stopping, and when he reached the edge of a cliff where broken branches and floodwater churned below, he paused, only for a second. Then he leapt. Anya didn't know how long she had been floating. She was too tired to think, too cold to move. Her eyes opened only when a strange sound pulled her back from the edge of sleep. A bark. Soft. Rhythmic. Nearby. She turned her head. Slowly. There, paddling against the current, was the dog. The stray. The one from the village. The one nobody ever saw twice in the same place. He barked again. Not loud. Just enough. He reached her side. He nudged her hand with his nose. She blinked. She wasn't dreaming. The dog swam in circles around her, barking toward the trees, toward the hills. He climbed halfway onto the branch, placing himself between her and the river. And when she began to slip, Fingers losing grip, body sagging. He grabbed her sleeve in his teeth and held her there. Morning hadn't come yet, but something had changed. Hope. It came not from the sky, or the village, or the searchers still calling into the dark. It came from a creature no one believed in. A dog who had never asked for anything. A dog who had nothing, and gave everything. And that is only the beginning. The night had teeth. The storm had come down hard, pounding the valley with sheets of rain that made the earth bleed mud. Wind howled through the trees like a warning, tearing at rooftops and sending shutters slamming against walls. People huddled inside their homes, counting every flash of lightning, every thunderclap, hoping the worst would pass before it found someone they loved. But Anya was already lost. Downstream, wrapped around the thick trunk of a dying tree, her small body shivered. Her hands, cut and raw, clutched the bark like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Her eyes opened in small, dazed flickers. She couldn't feel her legs. She couldn't remember how long she had been there. All she could see was water and him, the dog. He hadn't left. Not once. When the rain grew heavier and lightning turned the sky white, he stayed. When the river rose again and the branch groaned under her weight, he barked, paced, and licked her face to keep her awake. Anya didn't speak. Her lips were blue, but her eyes followed him, watched him move with a strange kind of focus, as if she understood something even the adults never would. This wasn't a normal dog. This was something else. In the village, the search had not stopped. By now, nearly every family had joined. The riverbank was lined with lanterns and voices. Ravi had been found, clinging to a thick patch of reeds a mile downstream, sobbing, soaked, and shivering. He was alive, but all he could say was, "Anya went after me. She went into the water. I saw her, and then she was gone." The adults tried to reassure him, but in their eyes, there was fear. Children don't survive river floods, especially not at night. But then one man, old and quiet, pointed into the dark hills. "I heard barking." The others turned. Another voice joined him. "So did I, just before the thunder. Over there." "Too far," someone said. "That's beyond the bend." But the old man was already walking. The dog saw them first. He stood up straight, ears flicking. Anya barely noticed. But then came the light, 2 flickers through the trees. Lanterns. Voices. He barked, short and sharp. Then again. And again. The sound sliced through the storm. One rescuer stopped. "Did you hear that?" Another nodded. "There. Down by the rocks." They moved fast, slipping through mud and brush, until they saw the impossible. A stray dog, standing at the edge of the river, barking like a sentry. Tail stiff, body soaked, eyes fixed. And beside him, a small figure slumped across a tree branch. The rescue was chaos. 3 men plunged into the river with ropes. 2 women scrambled for dry blankets. Someone shouted to bring a cart. Another for a doctor. The dog didn't move. He watched every motion, only backing away once Anya was pulled from the water. Even then, he followed them all the way to the cart. When someone tried to shoo him off, a young boy stepped forward. He saved her. They let him stay. By morning, the village knew. The girl who should have died, lived. And the dog no one had fed her hope. People gathered at the healer's hut where Anya slept. Ravi sat by her side, holding her hand. He wouldn't let go. And outside, just beyond the door, the dog waited. He didn't bark. He didn't beg. He just sat, silent, watching. For the first time in his life, he was not invisible. A name was whispered, then spoken. "Raksha," one of the elders said. "It means protector." The children loved it, and so the name stayed. Raksha, the dog who didn't run, the dog who dove into a flood, the dog who brought Anya home. But the story doesn't end there, because the next storm would come. And this time, Raksha would not just save a girl. He would save an entire village. The storm had passed, but its echo lived on. For days, the village buzzed with the same story, told in different voices. The girl was nearly gone, until the dog found her. I saw it. He didn't leave her side all night. Dogs like that don't come from nowhere. Anya recovered slowly. Her hands healed first, then her voice. She barely remembered the cold or the water. But she remembered him. Raksha. When she opened her eyes for the first time since the flood, he was there, curled beside the door, head resting on his paws. And when her gaze met his ears perked up, just once. That was enough. She smiled. A tired, tearful smile. "Good boy," she whispered. In the days that followed, the villagers changed. They brought Raksha food scraps, bones, even meat. They built him a shelter beside Anya's home. Children drew his face in the mud. Men carved small figures of him in wood. He became more than a dog. He was a symbol, and yet he remained distant, quiet, wild. He never let anyone touch him, except Anya. Every night, he'd disappear into the hills, returning at dawn to sit near her door, as if guarding her dreams. And Anya began to walk again. Her strength came back slowly, one step at a time. Ravi helped her at first, then Raksha. He'd walk ahead, then turn, wait for her and continue. Always watching, always leading. One evening, a new sound stirred the valley. Thunder. Again. Clouds rolled over the mountains, heavy and dark. The villagers froze. The last flood had been sudden, violent. They knew what could happen. This time they prepared. They dug channels to divert water. They gathered the elders and placed the children higher up the hill. They stored food and checked lanterns. And Raksha? He watched it all. Then he left. No one saw where he went, until the barking started. Came from the far fields, short, sharp, urgent. Anya heard it first. She stood up. "That's Raksha." The villagers followed. What they found turned their fear to awe. A dam had started to break. Water was rushing toward a low-lying hut where an old couple lived. Too far to hear the warning bells. Raksha had gone there first. He'd barked, scratched at their door, barked again. When they didn't answer, he entered the hut and dragged out a blanket, then another, then barked again, furious. Finally, the couple stirred, opened the door, saw the rising water, and understood. They ran. Raksha led them up the hill. Just minutes later, the flood took the hut. He didn't stop. That night, Raksha alerted 3 more families. He barked at collapsing trees, dug at a blocked drain that would have flooded the grain shed, led a searcher back to a lost child. By morning, not a single person had been lost. The village stood. Because of him, Raksha became legend. Years passed. Anya grew taller, stronger. She never left the village. Became a teacher. Married. Named her first son after the dog who saved her. And Raksha? He grew old. Slower. Grayer. But still, each morning he sat by her door. Until one day he didn't. They found him beneath the fig tree, his favorite place. He was still. Peaceful. As if he had simply gone to sleep. The village mourned. They buried him on the highest hill, overlooking the river, carved his name in stone, told his story to every child. And every year, when the rains returned, they lit a candle by his grave. Not because he was a dog, because he reminded them what it meant to protect, to stay, to love without asking anything in return. That was Raksha. The stray who belonged to no one, and saved everyone. They called him Raksha, the protector. A stray with no home, no name, and no promise of safety. Yet when the flood came, he didn't run. He stayed. He saved. He watched over a child, warned a village, and became the legend they still whisper about when the rain begins to fall. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes in silent heroes. Because sometimes the ones who save us aren't human at all.